Hey guys, greetings. This is New York Dan with some breaking news and what you call a technical update and my take on this Titanic tourist submarine that went down for an expedition to the bottom of the ocean. Just, geez, within the last Today's Monday night, I'm doing this update. Within the last 48 hours or so, I did not even know that there was such a thing. This is a hell of a concept, and it was a British billionaire came up with this, right? He figured out that he could have a custom sub made up that took a limited number of passengers down to the bottom of the ocean where you could actually view the Titanic. Now, keep in mind, you cannot have problems with claustrophobia if you want to venture on this expedition. The inside of the sub is basically like a tube, and there's a small window, almost like a peephole lens, to look out of at the end of it. It's pretty incredible stuff. I just heard about this afternoon, or this evening actually, on the news, and I didn't even know that you could do this. And for most people, this is unobtainable. This is a voyage that costs $250,000 a person to go down on this thing. Pretty incredible. So what happened was, this is off 900 miles off the coast of Cape Cod, and I believe that's at a northeast trajectory going toward the north, because I've seen the map updates, and the location of the Titanic wreckage is, if you look at the map, it's pretty much off the coast of Newfoundland, a little bit south of where Halifax would be. Halifax, Newfoundland. And New York Dan, myself, I have actually been there in Halifax, Newfoundland on a cruise. I cruised on the Regal Princess across the Atlantic, and I left from the original departing site of the Titanic. It's the last stop off the coast of Ireland. I believe it was called Cobb, Ireland. And they did a few tenders back and forth to the Titanic to bring a few more passengers and some last minute supplies on board the ship. And from that point, it was sailing across the Atlantic. When they go across the Atlantic, they do a circular type of voyage to account for the curvature of the Earth. So when you see it on a map, a flat 2D map, you're going to see it is an arc. Okay, so you go from the coast of Ireland, it kind of arcs along the Atlantic, and then I believe the Titanic at the end of that arc was headed for New York. So the ship I was on, I saw the wreckage site of the Titanic with the submarine, and my ship actually went further north than Titanic did. But I sailed on this voyage in September, so icebergs, it wasn't during the coldest weather, or I assume the Titanic ice situation where it hit an iceberg was most likely during the colder part of the year. I believe it was in early spring. Okay, now my point of this video update is to talk about this semi-submersible thing before I make a lot of mistakes trying to figure out all this Titanic trivia here. I have a picture of it up here that I brought up on the internet. It says this thing is 22 feet long. It carries 5 people, and it has emergency oxygen that can last 96 hours. The update I heard is this happened early in the morning on Sunday, and they have about 72 hours of oxygen left. Okay, as I'm doing this video update, it's now Monday night. And I've been like studying and geeking out on this, trying to learn all what's going on with the situation. So I'm giving you the latest information that I have. Now here's the scary part. The depth that the submarine goes down to, 13,123 feet. This thing is called the Titan Submersible. 13,000 feet below the surface of the ocean. It's unthinkable that you could go down this far. Okay? I'm going to tell you, I studied submarines that were operated during World War II, right? And when they were on patrol and a ship detected them, what the ship would do is it would drop depth charges. These depth charges were basically small bombs that were in like drums. And they had a pressure sensor in them. When they got down to a certain depth, they would blow up. And the ship would set these depth charges on the deck. They would program it out, drop these things off to try to blow the submarine out of the water, so to speak. It would cause the submarine to either crack, malfunction, or have to come, because of this, it would have to come to the surface, where they then could shoot it down or capture the sub. Okay, my point being, to evade this, if you were in one of these submarines during the war, you would take it down to a really deep depth where the ship would program these depth charges for usually stuff closer to the surface of the water, because as you drop the canisters down with ocean currents, once you get down to a really deep depth, those canisters could float way off course, and it would be less and less accurate. So what I'm trying to say here, the subs, to evade these depth charges, would actually try to go down deeper than they were designed for. Now, when I was looking at these World War II submarines, most of the time they would only go down a small amount of depth. A couple hundred feet would be fine. You know, around 250 feet. A ship would not draw that much water. A large ship may draw around 50 feet of water at the most. So if you went down even 250 feet, you could cruise your submarine underwater. It would run on electric back then, and you wouldn't be in danger of hitting the bottoms of any ship. You could float stealth mode, undetected, go where you want to go. When they were dropping depth charges, I've heard of them taking the sub beyond its designed limits And from what I remember, it's only around, the most those subs were designed to go down was really like something around 1,500 feet, 1,000 to 1,500 feet. 2,000 feet, 2,000 feet would be pushing it. That would be like very dangerous. Like, give it all it's got. We're going to go for an experimental, we're faced with an onslaught of depth charges. We've got to go way down. And we may not come back from this. That's how dangerous it's how far down it is, how far we're talking about. I don't know if my camera adjusted or my lights just, no, I don't know. But the point is, when they took the sub down that deep, the crew was very scared. The sheet metal on the sub, the plating, it's more than sheet metal, plating, and the beams inside the sub, the reinforcements, would creak and moan as they went down, because the pressure in the ocean would be immense. The crew was afraid of the whole sub simply imploding. If you get leaks, the water would come in like you were using a pressure washer, one of those gas-powered pressure washers. A small leak, it would spray in like a pressure washer. We're talking thousands of pounds pressure, water pressure, because the gravity of the earth is putting so much force. The water weighs so much. All that, the weight of that water that's above you is going to be pressing down on any kind of air pocket, all sides of it. The pressure, the gravitational pressure of that water is going to cause it to be under pounds per square inch, thousands of pounds, all sides of it. So here's the deal. That was during World War II. You're talking going down like 2,000 feet would be like unheard of. Like, that's like the limits of like what man could do. Well, this Titan submersible, the wreck of the Titanic, it's sitting around 13,000 feet under the surface of the ocean. So you can imagine the pressures. If only 2,000 feet's a lot for a World War II sub. Man, this thing, it's basically, this thing is a cylindrical tank. Here's your window right here. This little, they say, porthole window. That little window in the front of this chamber or porthole, that's the only thing you can see out of. Now, when it gets down there, I am assuming, when you see these mechanisms here on the side of this sub, I'm assuming that these are probably a propulsion unit. It has an electric motor, and it will enable you to move the thing around so you can like see exactly what view you're getting out of that window. And these guys, if you have 5 guys on board, they would take turns looking out the porthole window at the amazing sights of the Titanic wreckage. This is really, it's a cool concept, but I mean, playing armchair quarterback here, obviously now that the thing has a problem. They didn't quite think this through when they designed this thing. Here's the advantage. well, they have computers on board to control this stuff. And because this thing is free, floating, and running, you can like probably bring it down and get really good views around the Titanic wreckage, and you're free to maneuver it. 13,000 feet, it's a long way down. I'm just thinking, would it have been better? And I don't even know how much freaking cable. You're talking a couple miles of cable. Would it have been better to put a steel cable with a wire, communications wire, tethered to a sub like this, a semi-submersible, and lower it down from the mothership so that you would definitely have communication with them, and if something went wrong you could pull it up with the mothership, a spool of cable. You could just, like a fishing pole, pull it back up if something went wrong. Now, this sounds like a very sensible idea, but the amount of cable and wire, we're talking about a spool that maybe it's because of the cost of what that would, how much that would be. That could be why they didn't do it that way. They may have gotten a little overconfident on this. Now I'm going to give you some technical information that I heard. Here's the problem. The radio communication, like you would have for an airplane or a spacecraft, you have two-way radio. I heard that that does not work through the water. They have a limited distance they can transmit a radio signal. I heard it has to be right under the mothership. They didn't specify how deep. They were able to give like a text message style communication through radio waves from the mothership down to this unit. And there's also another thing called a ping, which it's a radio signal sent out by this thing that they can detect. I'm not 100% sure if they're talking about an ultrasonic ping or a radio transmission ping. Ultrasonic means that they have a speaker and it's actually sending a sound wave through the water that they can pick up with like an underwater microphone. So this is the latest. The ship went down when it left for the tour. It traveled for 1 hour 45 minutes underwater, headed down to the Titanic wreckage. During that 1 hour 45 minutes, that is the time that it was sending the ping back to the mothership. So they knew where, they knew the depth of this ship. I'm assuming they knew the depth. It was on its way down, and the information I have is it takes 2 hours, a little over 2 hours to get down to the wreckage site. So the information is they were 2/3 of the way down to the wreckage. Now that's pretty damn deep if you're talking about 13,000 feet underwater. So at that point, the communication or the ping signal disappeared. This vessel, being that it doesn't have a rope going to it, or a line, I should say, that oceanographers would be laughing. They heard me say that, a rope. Put a rope going to it. When it got down that, being that it doesn't have that, they did factor in some safety features into this unit. I heard that it has a special system. Now this is not confirmed, and the place I heard this was the Agenda Free TV that guy Steve does. I'm wondering about it, how true this is, but what the bottom line is, I heard there's some kind of weighting on this thing that's glued on by an adhesive, and the adhesive is designed, if it's in the water long enough, I'm thinking like 2 days, like near the end of the emergency oxygen, the adhesive dissolves and these weights fall off the unit. At that point, the unit would then float up. If it's buoyant with air inside, it would float up to the surface where you could find it. Now, that's one safety feature, and there were a number of others designed to get you back up to the surface if something went wrong, because there's no cable, there's no tether, and no radio communication, not deep. Here's the thing. If this unit, we don't know if this unit is on the surface. There are ships out there trying to look for it right now, and they're rushing to the site. I heard they deployed equipment from the coast of Cape Cod. It's a 900-mile trip to get out here. What's on Cape Cod? There's an Woods Hole Oceanographic Research Center. I believe that's where the guy that found Titanic, Dr. Ballard, he worked out of that site. And I think they're sending vessels. My hunch is it's from that Woods Hole. They're sending vessels up that are research vessels that may have a submarine to go down there. Now, it's going to take them like 24 hours, to even more than that, more than a day probably, to get to this, to do 900 miles through the sea, nautical miles out there. So this is a race against time. They had the 96 hours of emergency oxygen. I think there are Navy ships or Coast Guard looking on the surface for this thing to appear. I would imagine they would have a flashing light, a strobe on it, being how cheap LED technology is now. It would make sense. You would be very dumb not to factor this in. If you had a strobe on that, if that comes to the surface of the ocean in the dark of night, you should be able to see that beacon for a long distance. A ship on the surface of the ocean can see roughly 20 miles out. What happens is the curvature of the earth prevents them from seeing any further. But still, if, depending on weather conditions, and I did hear from someone in Nova Scotia that it is like raining and foggy out there tonight. If that's the case, that's going to be going to hinder this effort if they are at the surface. Okay, now there's another problem. The hatch on this unit, when the people go in here, because it has to go down to such deep depths of the ocean, you're talking about massive stuff. You're talking about thick, thick metal, massive pressures. What they did is, and God, I would not want to do this myself. I'm too scared to even go on anything remotely like this. They have to take the plate, the hatch plate, and put it on this thing after the people get inside, and then bolt it shut from the outside of the unit. That is scary. Very scary stuff. It's just like going into an iron coffin. I guess that eliminates the possibility of having complications with hinges or sealing of the door. This is like maybe the strongest way to do it. When you bolt, you tighten these bolts down. Maybe it increases the strength of the cylinder that's underwater because you have the pressure on it. This is strange and extreme stuff. This is not your normal marine, like a boat or even like a tourist sub that goes under a little bit. This is extreme. 13,000 feet, immense pressures. You get a pinhole leak, it will spray in like a power washer. So what we're dealing with here, I don't even want to, I really don't even want to do it, to speculate on how bad this is, but I kind of feel like if it was at the surface of the water and it had a beacon on it, they would be able to have found it by now. The other problem is, there's a very good possibility when the sub was going down for that hour and 45 minutes, and then they lost the ping from it, the radio ping. There's a possibility that when that happened, it happened because they got down to, that's a pretty damn deep depth. I mean, if they were 3/4 of the way down or 2/3, you're talking 7,000 feet, maybe 8,000 feet. What could have very well happened is they lost that ping because something happened with the hull of this submarine. A small breach of the hull lets water in. If it filled with water, it could have shorted the electronics out. The other thing that could happen is a malfunction of this hull and the whole thing can just implode, wiping out the electronics and the people on board. That might be a very scary prospect, very scary. It might be almost a blessing though, because the alternative could be that you're in this thing. I mean, it's unthinkable. You're stuck in this thing at the bottom of the sea. And they were talking on Steve's Agenda Free about, oh, they would put the crew or the people on board would be instructed to sleep, to conserve oxygen and wait for rescuers. Man, I don't know. You'd have to have nerves of steel to be able to do that. My God. This thing, I don't know why they didn't, why they couldn't have put a tether, do some kind of a thing like that. So the only hope is, if they are correct, what I heard on Steve's live cast, and these weights come off the thing after a certain amount of time, and it floats up to the surface. You know, that might be a lifesaver right there, because when you're down this deep, trying to locate this thing is going to be damn near impossible. You have to use sonar, And with sonar, it's just like radar, uses sound waves to create a map of the seafloor. I have it for my boat. Matter of fact, I got a brand new Garmin one that I got to install and get out there, which it's coming up. I'm going to put it on my channel when I finally get going on this stuff. So if anyone does boating, they know about sonar. It's the same thing as what they call now, like the depth sounder, chart plotter, depth sounder, fish finder. That's sonar. If anyone has seen the fish finder. But this is massively deeper, and they would drop the sonar transmitter way down, probably on a cable, to read what's going on near the bottom of the ocean. So if this thing landed on the bottom, it's going to be very hard to find it. There could be rocks and terrain down there that would make it, tricky to read. It's not as big as Titanic. It's not something that's so big that you could find it with sonar that easily. Compared to Titanic, this thing is microscopic. So if they can somehow get it to the surface, that's a game changer. If there is an emergency thing like that, I hope that they have something like that. They factored this in to get it back up in case of a real problem. But you gotta wonder if it did not implode, I would think the crew would be able to take measures. I'm sure they have like air ballast systems on board where you use compressed air to fill up ballast tanks and force the water out to do an emergency surface. In World War II, those submarines, they would say it was called blowing the tanks. They're like, blow the tanks. We've got a surface right away. Blow the ballast tanks. And the thing would go right up. If the crew was on board and they were functioning, I would think that would be the first thing they would do, and this thing would be right at the surface. So the prospects are dismal, in my opinion, because they haven't found it, and it's nighttime. Why wouldn't they have found it if it has a light on it? Let's hope I'm wrong. Now, this thing was called Oceangate Explorations. Each person going on here, 5 tourists, I believe, went down. Capacity 5 people. Now, wait a minute. There must be some crew on board, so there must be less than 5 tourists, but 5 people total. The tourists were supposed to pay $250,000 US dollars to go down on this thing. This is not for normal people. Okay, let's put it that way. One of the guys on here is a billionaire, and from what I heard, he is one of the founders of this concept or company. I'm going to show you his picture. I have it up here. This guy right here. This guy is on there right now. So I give him credit. Like, you've come up with a concept like this, and you're amongst the first to actually do what you're trying to accomplish, like what you're having tourists do. That's how much confidence you have in your system. But it's definitely dangerous stuff. this is what it last looked like on the surface. This is the actual thing floating on the surface of the water. The guy I showed you is a British billionaire, and he is on that thing. I don't want to butcher his name. It's something like Hamish, I believe. But the number of people that have been down at these depths, I heard, is actually, believe it or not, it's much more common. There have been many people that have ventured into space. A huge amount of people have ventured into space, as opposed to the number of people that have been down to these depths. So guys like this, if you're going down where Titanic is, you are amongst a handful of people on the whole planet that have ever been down here. More rare than astronauts, guys going up on these tourist space missions. That's easy compared to this, apparently. What's going on? This is what I can tell you. It set sail from St. John's in the Newfoundland. And that's where, like I said, I've been to Halifax, Newfoundland, right here. On the 16th of June, which would have been Friday. This is the wreckage site of Titanic. This is how professional my channel is. And the thing is, I'm doing this, I want to do it ASAP. I don't want to deal with editing. I'm just going to zoom in on this, because by the time I edit it, and nobody really cares if somebody edits their channel and tries to make it look like they're on TV or some crap. Let's be real, they don't care about that. You want the information. I do this because I'm interested in science. I'm not like trying to. I don't get paid for this. I'm not trying to get rich being a YouTuber. I do this just for the teaching people about the knowledge and stuff going on with an event. You know, I comment on like cruise, maritime related stuff. I'm into science and technology. I want to do a video about Flight 800 too, about some like airplane catastrophes that I've researched when I get the time. So subscribe to the channel for free, because I don't put out a regular video. You never know when I'm going to get time and this stuff's going to pop up on the channel. So I would recommend you just subscribe to it. Then that way you get notified if there's some kind of notification option. You can do a bell or something. So here we go. 16th of June it departed Newfoundland. And it sailed south. This is the exploration. It's called the Polar Prince, the mothership. Okay, it sailed down here, apparently. On the 18th of June it arrived. That would have been Sunday. Now, I guess this is the best, maybe based on ocean currents, this was the best area to park the mothership, so to speak. I imagine if it's 13,000 feet, they're just drifting. The ship is drifting. But there is technology I've heard about this when I've been on cruises, where it's called dynamic positioning. The mothership actually could have GPS on it, and it runs thrusters and the props to keep the ship in one specific spot. Okay, now, okay, hold on. They moved this over. The mothership, I believe, moved over to this site here on the 19th of June, which is Monday. Okay, which was probably early in the morning today. Right here is the wreck site of the Titanic. So, this thing, I'm going to read you what they're telling me here. This thing, there's probably a certain amount of distance that they would be able to search to find it if it actually is on the surface. Whoop. Apologize for that. We'll adjust this thing. That's how professional we are. Hold on, I got important information coming up here. Okay. Now. There we go, right there. Okay. Okay, now here's what happened. They arrived at that site. This thing, by the way, this is an important point. I'm going to zoom this out here. There we go. This thing is called a submersible. There's a slight difference between this and a submarine. A submarine has more systems on board for propulsion, communications, maneuvering. It's a lot bigger and a lot more features. This thing has a limited ability because it's just called a submersible. It's really not meant to travel. It's meant to just go down to a site, look around it, very limited, how far it can move around and what's on board, because in order to have this thing crush proof at such a deep depth, you have to use immense metal protection, and that's going to add to the weight, and you have to keep it as small as possible for crush proof, to be crush proof. So you can't really put a lot on it. This submersible usually carries a pilot, 3 paying guests, and what the company calls a content expert. I guess, in other words, that would be like a tour guide who says, oh, I'm a historian, this is what we're looking at on the Titanic at the wreckage site. The trip set sail from St. John's in Newfoundland. Each full dive to the wreck, including the descent and ascent, reportedly takes around 8 hours. Wow. So even on a good day, okay, you got to be what they used to have that show Fear Factor, and they would say apparently fear is not a factor for you, because you have to be in this little capsule for 8 hours when this thing goes according to plan. So it takes a long time to get down to that depth, and then you have to ascend and get back up to the surface. The Oceangate website lists 3 submersibles it owns, and only the Titan is capable of diving deep enough to reach the Titanic wreckage. The vessel weighs 23,000 pounds. That's 10,400 kilograms. If you're in a country that uses you don't use the United States or English system of pounds. Okay, according to the website, this thing can reach depths up to 13,100 feet. And that's 96 hours of life support available for the crew. A vessel called the Polar Prince, which is used to transport submersibles to the record site, was involved in the expedition, its owner told the BBC. So, the one thing I wanted to add in about this, 13,100 feet, I believe the Titanic is it's at 12,500 feet, the wreckage of the Titanic. So this is pushing like the limits of this submersible where they're at, going down that far. What I wanted to tell you is, I heard there are very few research submarines that can go down this deep. And this may present a huge problem. If this thing is down that deep, to send another sub down to find it or look for this thing may not be an option. This very company, it said their other vessels, their other submersibles can't go down that deep. They're not designed for that depth. Now, this guy, a CBS reporter, David Pogue, if I didn't butcher that, he traveled in the Titan submersible last year. He told the BBC about issues that both the submersible crew and the land crew were likely to be experiencing. He said there was currently no way to communicate with the vessel because GPS and radio would not work underwater, which is what I was mentioning. I heard that on Steve's channel before. When the support ship is directly over the sub, they can send the short text messages. Okay, and they said they are no longer getting any response at this time. The passengers are sealed inside the vessel by bolts applied from the outside. He said there's no way to escape, even if you happen to be able to rise to the surface under its own power, if it can surface. They can't really get out of the ship if it's on the surface. They need rescuers. And that's dangerous because you need air to breathe coming into that ship. You know, you can't just... The oxygen supply is very limited. So this is what we know at this time. Then they talk about the wreckage, the whole bit on that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm running low on battery, and I basically got everything covered that I wanted to cover. I'm going to say I will do an update if I hear anything, any more information about this. I'll definitely do an update. I got a lot of new videos coming up with Mercedes stuff. I got another Mercedes. Got a bunch of automotive stuff. I'm going to do more on the cruise ships and oh yeah, the Flight 800 video. I was supposed to do that. Had been on the radio before talking about that on the radio show. It's all coming. You just gotta bear with me. So subscribe so you don't miss the stuff. And let's hope we get better information, or the what do you call the news is good news that comes out about this tomorrow. You know, we'll see what happens if any developments come up with this. I'm going to be watching it. So I'll stay tuned. For now, I'm going to sign off, and I'll see you in the next video update.